Talofa lava, morena tātou, ko mai kesta tōku noa. I'm the Participation Development Manager at New Zealand Rugby. I've been there for 3 years. I've got two boys who play rugby. One of them plays here every Saturday morning, under-6 ripper. So I'm a coach for him. But I actually come from a football background, so I don't really know much about rugby, according to my colleagues anyway. But in football, I was a high-performance referee, and there'll be some colleagues from football in the room who say I didn't know much about football either, so I'm probably equally qualified to work in rugby. At the time I was recruited into rugby, they were looking for some different views, and I think it does sort of talk to the shift that sport's making, certainly rugby's making anyway, in terms of trying to get more views in the room, more views in the conversation about actually how to support the sport, how to lead the sport. So at that point I was recruited and have certainly provided, I think, as my colleagues would say, some different views about how rugby can move forward, particularly in terms of participation. Today I'm going to be talking about the impact that we've been trying to have for our under-12s and our under-12 boys, to be really specific. There's about 5,000 boys that play under-12s rugby nationally, and that's not an insignificant number when you think there's only about 30,000 11-year-olds boys in the country at any one time, and so it represents a significant number of those. The time period of this case study is over the period 2018 to today. So it is a period of sort of 3 years, but obviously impacted by COVID. So it does have sort of all the trials and tribulations that we all went through last year trying to navigate that space. It is a boys-only study. The reason being is that we've had some really exciting growth in the girls' space and lots of growing pains that have gone with it, and that's a case study for another day. But their growth has been so spectacular that it's actually masked some of the issues that we've got in the boys' space, and so that's why we've been drilling specifically into what their experience has been. And what we're trying to get out of that is some really key lessons so that we don't make the same mistakes as we continue to support the growth of our girls playing rugby. Today it's just me. It was meant to be Bill Wigglesworth as well from North Harbour Rugby Union, who's obviously a regional sporting organisation. You will hear from him a little bit later in the video clip, so you'll get a perspective from the sort of regional level. Just for context, under-12s in terms of our sort of Small Blacks model, at that point they're playing full field, so the same size field as an All Black. There's 15 of them on the field. They're playing all sorts of systems that coaches want to see replicated from the All Blacks down to under-12s, and so that's the experience, or that's the world that they're living in at the time, and that's, by that stage, it's their second season of full field tackle rugby. So rugby is clearly a really important part of our national psyche. It is, in essence, our national game. It's a game that a lot of people have a connection to. Our market research tells us that 3 million or so love or like our game. And we have a really large participation base, about 180,000 participants, 160,000 players, 31,000 of them were girls and women in 2019, and then a large number of coaches, referees and administrators. We have a really considerable network across the country, 450 rugby clubs, 220 secondary schools delivering the game. And every town you go to, most things have closed down now. The steel mill's closed down, or the freezing works, the post office has left, the banks have closed. But typically there's always a primary school and usually a rugby club or some sort of combined sports club with rugby being a part of it. So rugby has some really considerable numbers and strength. It has some really impressive reach and impact across New Zealand society. But we are being really challenged in a lot of different ways, and this is a laundry list of the things that sort of we're challenged with. Some of them are not particular to rugby. All parts of the sports sector are experiencing these, but we also have our own unique challenges. And they range from sort of the appeal and relevancy of the game, the way that people are wanting to engage in the game but find it difficult, the growing pains we have around supporting girls and women, around the learning environment, coaching, resources, infrastructure, etc. The perceptions and the reality of injury in the game. It is a contact and collision sport. It's a game that requires a lot of courage to play, and it comes with some consequences when it goes wrong. And in the early days, spinal injuries were our big focus, but today it's really around concussion and player well-being. The changing face of New Zealand, how do we connect with emerging communities, but as well as supporting those communities that play a really important part, particularly Pacifica and Māori. The secondary school environment, again, really challenging for us. A real challenge trying to get the balance right between participation and performance. And clubs have a whole range of issues that they're trying to deal with just to survive today, let alone what it looks like into the future. We're also challenged in terms of mindsets. People still remembering the amateur days, pre-1996, and how could we just get back to that and it'll all be okay. So how does this all play out in terms of participation? So just to explain the graph, the shape is really the important piece here, not the numbers, but the age of our participants is along the bottom here. This represents all the boys playing in club and school from age 5 right through to age 35. So age along the bottom, number of players along the left-hand side there. The blue line is what numbers look like in 2009, and the orange line is what numbers look like in 2018, which was about the time that we started doing this analysis and realising there was a case for change. So what did it tell us? It told us that we recruit and retain pretty good numbers at early ages, even slightly better in 2018 than we did 10 years ago, or in 2009. We see relatively similar numbers participating at sort of 20 and beyond, but we see some really concerning drops between under 12 and under 18. So clearly some issues for us in the tail end of our Small Blacks model, which is up to under 13, and then the whole secondary school experience. So clearly things needed to change, and it was at this point around 2018 that we started realising that we really needed to take a philosophical shift from sort of game-centric to participant-centric. So what that meant for us is that we needed to stop trying to make the players fit the game and actually make the game fit the players. And it was a really important shift. It's one that we're always working on. It's not one that everyone accepts. We still have people talking favourably of sort of amateur days, of days where kids would come out of school willingly, roll up to rugby clubs and sign up for life, and no one had to lift a finger. Okay, and we know that that's not the reality. We're also having increasing challenges around trying to normalise and legitimise all the other ways that you can play the game. Even sevens, in which you can earn a living from as a professional athlete, you can win an Olympic medal, still doesn't have the same sort of mana and support as the 15s model. So a real critical shift for us, and one that we're still working on. And I'd just like to acknowledge Sport NZ's leadership at this point, because this has been something obviously they've been really seeding across the sector. And the balance is better philosophy. They've been serving it up like Kool-Aid, and we've been trying to drink it by the keg load. I would also like to acknowledge the other sort of big sports that we've been working with around the statement of intent, because from them we've learned a lot around how do we wrestle with some of these common issues. And so that collaboration has been really important. So in becoming more participant-centred, what we then started to think about, well, what does the model look like in terms of the participant experience? And this was the model that now really is at the heart of thinking about our participants. What we're recognising is there's 3 things that are really important to have in harmony. What's the design of the game? How's that delivered to them? And that's largely decided by organising committees around competition structure, which Alex talked to just a few moments ago. And then what's the environment created by the coaches, the clubs, the parents, and the schools. This approach really creates a whole lot more complexity, because now instead of having one game, which you try to make 160,000 participants fit, you've now got 160,000 participants, and you've got to try and work out what's the game that they want. And so it does create a whole lot of new opportunity, but also some really challenging sort of moments where you're kind of trying to think, okay, how do we position all of this? So what does this mean for our smallest players? So what we knew from that previous data is that we were having some real challenges in that sort of under 12 to under 18 space. If we just overlay the format of the Small Blacks model, so they start off playing 7s for a few years, then they move to 10s on a slightly bigger field, and then by the time they hit under 11s, they're now playing full field 15-a-side rugby. What we could see was that year on year, under 12 numbers were falling. And that was a sort of a phenom that we hadn't really seen when we had looked at all of our data. But once we started stripping it out and looking specifically at boys, that's what we could see. And we knew that that wasn't going to be sustainable. So if this is the problem that we've decided we need to solve, we needed to take some action. So like many, it's easy to fall into the trap of, okay, let's just put on more events, let's just try and send out more messages, try to influence coaches and parents about making the experience better. But we knew from experience that, and from learnings from others, that we're going to have to take a much more deeper view here around, how we're going to drive this change, how we're going to triage the issue. So using levels of perspective approach, take into account our participant models that I talked to a few moments ago, what we learned from other sports, what was the research that existed both in rugby but across the sector, and also a bit of judgment and a little bit of our data. We came to the conclusion that a major contributing factor to why we were losing so many at under-12s was the quality experience that these kids were having at under-11s. So they weren't having a great experience under-11s. That was the first time they encountered full field, 15-a-side tackle, and as a result they weren't returning as under-12s. So as a result of that, we adopted a mental model which was to enhance player development, to enhance their engagement in the game. We believe that they need to be moving to a smaller sided approach. And in doing so, the hypothesis was that it was going to give us a better result at under-12s. So as a result, we started doing like we all do, creating pretty posters about what it looks like and all the value add, all very cute, it's all very important. But the reality is that none of this actually has any impact. Okay, that's just intention. So you've got to turn intention into impact, and that will always involve change. A saying that Alex said to me 3 years ago when I did my SDL, and has always stuck with me, is that with change in the sports sector, you've always got to focus on the compass, not the clock. And there's a whole lot of reasons for that. People often save their best and their worst behaviour and judgment for sport. They might be completely reasonable people in everything else they do in their lives, but in sport, because sport creates such strong emotions, it stirs such strong emotions in people. For a lot of people, it's a lot more than fun. It's joyful, and for some of them, it's the only joy they have in their lives. They're very, very defensive, very engaged, very engaged in preserving, what's important for them, and so that mindset piece can get in the way. So, how are we going to go about change? Well, the reality was that we needed to embark on a change approach, and essentially my job at New Zealand Rugby is as a change agent. So we adopted a model, the Cotters model, for those of you that know that, as the approach that we're going to take to drive this change. And for those of you that know it, you need to establish a sense of urgency. That's the key thing, is you've got to get a little bit of momentum around, is there a case for change here? Now in 2016, our provincial unions, all 26 of them, had a series of town halls with New Zealand Rugby and said they had some really major concerns about the game. One of them was around what was happening in secondary schools, and the other one was around participation development. And so it took us a couple of years, but by 2018, we were in a position where we could actually start doing something about it. We had capability in place, and we'd started a philosophical shift. And so we had a guiding coalition already. We already had 26 willing partners wanting to make these changes, but what we didn't have was really a clear vision about how we're going to do that. So we developed that vision. Okay, we're going to be more participant-centred. We really unpacked what that meant for us, and then we started the communicating of that generally, but also specifically. And so in this particular case, it was around under-11s. Under-11s were going to go through a change, and so we communicated that. We over-communicated that. We gave our PUs a chance to communicate that, but we also worked with them, particularly around organising committees, and that's where the battles really are. Organising committees, it's not clubs, it's not schools, it's not PUs, it's organising committees where the battle is. We spent a lot of time working with them, fronting up, owning the change, owning all the explanation, owning all the heat that came with this change, and there was a lot of it. And then we rolled out the change, and that change rolled out pretty quickly. In August 2019, the New Zealand Rugby Board approved the change. They have to approve all our domestic safety law variations, and that change was to be effective the following season, and so we had 4 to 5 months to really drive that change through. We did get some real short-term wins. We had a lot of PUs that had really engaged junior rugby committees who really welcomed the change. They could see it coming and really embraced it, and the clip I'll show shortly sort of is an illustration of some of those short wins. but the key was you'd never let up. And so even today we have some that are still lingering behind, even though the change was made 2 years ago. We've still got a couple of PUs or a couple of junior rugby committees who are digging their toes in, and so we've got to keep pushing through in terms of that message. And then lastly, incorporate that change into your culture. And so this case study is about under-12s and what we did at under-11s, but this whole small-sided approach, focusing on the participant experience, is the cultural change that we're trying to achieve across the whole game. So this was the change that we put in place. This is the way we went about it. Okay, so how did that land? So you're going to hear a little bit now from some of our participants about what this change meant for them and what they've experienced.
Well, obviously working with New Zealand Rugby as a part of their participation plan for 2021, we looked at the changes around the under-11 space, which what we call J3. For us, that really lined up with our philosophies of maximising engagement and providing quality experiences for our participants. So the changes that were made were taking the under-11s, which we call J3, from 15-a-side to 10-a-side, and full field to half field. The benefits for us are, like I said, just extending what we're trying to achieve from a strategy perspective, just evolving the game to suit and meet the demands and the needs of our participants.
A little boy last year who was very much losing interest in rugby. There was big, powerful tackles going on with lots more boys in the team, right, and less time on the field and so on. So yeah, we were pretty relieved, and we've got a boy that's changed from not liking rugby after 6 years of playing it to a boy this year who's got really passionate again about it and is winning player of the day and really getting into it. So yeah, it's been really good for us.
I think it's good up until probably about this grade. I think I like seeing the J2 sort of guys in the 15 side. I think it's starting to really form those positions, and the bigger guys get to play in the forwards and things like that.
Yep, definitely. There's more gaps. There's like more space to run through and go score some tries. Yeah.
There's less players and more opportunities to get the ball.
Well, I think for us at North Harbour, we talk about the climate of development, and what that means for us is, the kids having fun, developing at the right age and stage, lots of variety in what they do. So I see this as a real a good moment for the kids at under 11, because we're recalibrating, I think, the rugby system in regard to this is an appropriate piece for them right now. So for us, it's aligned nicely with what we're trying to do. We're all still around competing and winning and those types of things, but I think that this opportunity reflects around what's important for the kids.
Yeah, it's good. I think you never quite know what age, what position the kids are going to play as they grow up, and they get to try it all, I guess. And they're all learning how to bridge and get the ball and the ruck, and they're all getting a chance in the back line. And yeah, I think it's quite good for them to get a wide range of skills. Sure.
The best thing in this season probably was getting to touch the ball more often, got to sit around different positions.
It's easier to run because I'm on a half field and keep up my fitness. Yeah.
Yeah, it's short. Doesn't need so many players, so you can have smaller teams. A lot of passing and running, which is great for the kids.
The skills that I've developed this season is probably definitely passing. I've been getting a lot more faster and definitely getting tackles.
Some of the successes I've seen, operationally I've seen teams able to stay formed and operate on smaller numbers, which therefore means that kids are going to get more game time. So in the past we've seen 15 aside, probably bigger squads, more kids on the sideline. So this has been a really positive around that.
I think 15 aside at this age is where they should be, because then you start learning positional play better. You start developing the skill for the position that you're best suited for. 10 aside, it's just still too mucky.
They are still playing half fields, but they're not kicking, so a lot of the ball is being passed around. So pretty much every play, everybody gets to touch the ball, which means it's a lot more fun for the kids.
They've come a long way, and I think half fields probably good at this age, good size for them, especially half fields with too many more. It gets a little bit too congested in the middle of the field. So. Some good open play and get to do some good runs for the boys. So.
Listen to the kids. I think some of the feedback that we do get is from the adults and adults that have been involved in the traditional system, I suppose. So what matters most for the kids is probably the most important thing. But that's part of what we do. I mean, we're trying to influence a little bit of change around the experience and the climate of development. And I think once the parents or leaders and administrators see the value of the experience the kids are having, we're on our way to being able to deal with some of that negative comment.
I was asked to go and speak to their junior rugby committee about this change, and they had already been through a change just the previous year. So they're under 9s, I think. Sorry, they're under 10s. So we made a change at under 11s. They're under 10s. The previous year had been playing 15-a-side full field, so they were out of alignment with the national framework. They had readjusted, and then we asked them to make another adjustment. So normally, in any other PU, that would probably create some nuclear explosions. But because they did have the climate of development running through their provincial union and their community, there was a really good acceptance that, okay, we're doing this for the right reason. Obviously, one dissenter in there, and that's they're not a lone voice. There's a lot of voices like that saying that this is not the right change. They need to be moving to 15-a-side systems, pods, etc. But the reality is, I think the kids' voices are the ones that we probably need to hear the most. So just to sort of close this out, what does it mean in terms of the data? This is a comparison of under 12s numbers against the rolling average of under 11s over the last 5 years, or the period that we were analysing at the time. So the blue line is under 11s, rolling average. The orange line is the number of under 12s. So obviously year on year we were seeing a lot less returning. Bar 1 year, 2016. Any views on why 2016? Yep. So we historically see a big jump, well, a jump, not a big jump, but we see a jump in the data following a World Cup, particularly if we win. So 2011 was the same, 2016, 2019, not so good. But then COVID came along, so it's master data anyway, so that's right. But certainly, the trend was year on year, we were seeing less returning at under 12, so there was definitely something happening there that needed some attention. So what we've seen in 2021 is very preliminary results at this stage, because registrations are still coming in, so they might still grow a little bit more. But against the rolling average, certainly seen a big number of under 12s returning and good strength in under 11 numbers. So certainly the initial evidence is that there's been a really positive outcome from this change. So what next? So for the past 3 years, we've been on this change journey around increasing the retention of our players through improving the quality of the experience. This is one case study of a number that we've got underway around trying to address that. The big philosophical shift has been around from game-centred to participant-centred. We've all got great community plans, I'm sure, but the reality is the philosophy that's actually the driving factor here. We're still really early in that journey, but this example has been really heartening for us in terms of what can be done if we actually do focus on that and really put participants at the heart of the experience and really unpack what brings them joy in their sport. Ka pai.